Are you here because, like me, you have been excited about a reading and gone to class expecting students to be excited about it also, and expecting students to have read it and been disappointed? Does that ever happen to anyone else?
Not just you.
So what is y'all's experience with that, and how have you, what have you done about it so far, or what's happened so far? I just would like to hear a little input, even griping, if you want to gripe. Yes?
I'm not gonna gripe.
Okay, that's nice.
I'm anxious to hear some of the things that y'all, some of the ideas, because I started in the last year giving them weekly quizzes, so maybe that's not positive reinforcement necessarily, but that has helped a lot because my class is supposed to be very interactive, and when they didn't read the chapters, I felt like I was having a discussion with myself, so
Yeah.
that has helped. And also, I think the journal writing, because I have them write about the chapter we cover in class. It's due that the beginning of the week that we discuss that topic, so
Yeah.
they're taking a quiz, they're writing about it, so it has helped, I think, a little bit more of the simulated discussion about it.
Has anyone else gotten into, like, I think there's a trap, like, you assign reading, they don't read it, you delay the discussion, and still they haven't all read it. So the next time you assign a reading, you fuss at them beforehand, and you still don't get a great response. And eventually, has anyone given up, or at least temporarily given up on having students read? Deb?
I was gonna say, in clinical programs, I mean, it's not, we would like them read their textbook, the chapter. It's a little different than probably, reading y'all are assigning for arts and science, for liberal arts at least, but yeah, my students are so spoiled that, if they don't have the PowerPoint ahead of time, they can't prepare for class. Have a textbook that is actually better than the PowerPoint I can provide, and that is what you should be doing. And then I get marked. Usually they did something I've been teaching in a while, and I provide them everything at the beginning of class. I post all the PowerPoints for the semester, so they're spoiled and expect that.
Yeah.
So, if they don't get the PowerPoint till that day, then, then they can't prepare. But that's not the case. If they read it and took notes, and that would actually help them more than reading my PowerPoint all the time. So,
Because it's a lot more in depth.
but I have to do it, because then they can try to think what's important. At least that helped me when I was in graduate school, that I would get there, okay, I did pick this out as being important and that matters, or I didn't notice that, or whatever, I would just take notes in a notebook or whatever. But they're just so, they're, it's kind of breaking, but I don't know how to get them out of that, they're in that electronic age, they just expect everything to be there, and.
Yeah.
It'll be spoon-fed.
Yes, and they're used to it, and they expect that. Even our new faculty, Ms. Rucker, is like, it's my role. Like, they have everything, so why do they need me? But, and I think the students, how to get them out of that mentality without making them feel like you're just not doing your job,
I was thinking that the students tell me that they just have a hard time understanding it. Like I don't know if it's self-handicapping, is an excuse or if it's real, but they say, I just don't understand things when I read it. Like, I need you to talk to me about it because I don't understand it when I read it.
Yeah.
Your students just as smart as I am. They figure it out. I can figure it out or smarter.
But I'm just saying that's, part of the problem. It's just what they say. And
I think part of the problem is they expect to understand it the first time they read it.
Yeah.
their
And that they don't stop
expectations.
and think about a paragraph before they move on, especially in mathematics. You can't read that chapter like it was an honor. You have to stop and make sure you understand the vocabulary and things like that. So they expect to understand it the first time around.
Right. Yeah, not to have to work at it, right? And they want to blame the text. Like, well, this was no good because I couldn't understand it.
I
Right?
agree. I've tried to stay on with them, me teaching a new subject I hadn't looked at in like 15 years. I'm really having to work hard to make sure I understand a level I need to teach them, so they have to work probably not quite as hard to get where they need to be, but it's not, easy.
Well, I know, my experience, I got to a point where it was too much effort to convince them to read
Right.
by conventional methods, like it's really important and all this stuff.
I had lots
And
of
so I would
kids.
just assume they probably didn't read it, so I'll go over it really thoroughly to make sure they understand it, but then they realize what I'm doing, and the rest of them, the ones who were reading it, stop reading, because
Right.
I'm gonna go over it so completely and so thoroughly, so that it's a slippery slope, maybe.
And I think that's true for clinical programs too. They know we'll provide the information, we'll have it neatly organized for them.
We're enabling
Yeah,
them.
yeah, yes, we are.
Or hamstring.
So we have 3 awesome faculty members who maybe tell us how to avoid falling down that slippery slope, getting into those traps. And I forget who was gonna go first. I think it was David.
Okay. I'm going to talk about 3 things, and I'm actually going to send a couple handouts around. I don't remember how same problem, right? I mean, I teach, especially with intro, which most everybody takes, a very text-heavy course. If you read sort of, I think we're going to rate my professor, right, you'll see they complain about the amount of reading I have them do, so it's always fun to see what they really think. And I don't remember where I ran into this idea, this article I'm about to send you, but it's been really helpful to me, at least for the kind of readings that I have students do. And it's called a Monte Carlo quiz. So you'll see the paper here, the article where I got, so this is none of this is original to me. But this guy's I believe a CITE professor. And what he's done is he's combined 2 things that the research show are helpful. Oh yeah, that doesn't go with all that. That help students read and improve. One, which is random quizzes, right? So that random quizzing has been shown to be good for making students prepare, because they don't know when they'll have to be ready to answer a particular quiz question. But then combine that with a type of reading that's not so much, as you will, fact-based, right, but idea-based. So it creates sort of deep learning. And so the way it works, actually, and it works really well for me, is at the beginning of each class, we determine whether or not we're going to have a quiz. And we actually do that by rolling a die. As I like to tell them, we're in Louisiana, so we're just going to gamble for our quizzes. And they sort of get that. So we roll a die. If it comes up odd, there's no quiz. If it comes up even, there's a quiz. It's pretty straightforward. If there's a quiz, so there's always a 50-50 chance that there'll be a quiz. Right? So they know that from the very beginning. So they basically learn real quickly. They've always got to be prepared for class. And it's the first thing we do. The other thing I do, which is actually really something that FranU doesn't talk about, but I do as a particularly wicked form of motivation, is the person who rolls is the last person who walks into class. So I also get students who are really actually motivated to get to class before class starts because they don't want to be the one rolling the die. And so I teach a 7:45 class, and I almost never have anybody walk in late. So they're actually really sort of motivated to not be the one who rolls the die. But anyway, that's just something I do because I'm a mean, torturous person. The second time we roll the die, if there's a quiz, determines which question they'll answer. And what I actually do is I give them this, they have the same 5 questions for every possible quiz. And FranU lays them out in this article so you can read them. But the first question is a general knowledge, which is what is the main idea or main thesis of this particular passage that you read, and then identify sort of what that is. Pretty straightforward, but actually really important, right? What's the big idea in this chapter, in this article, or whatever the case may be. The second possible question is a comparison question. Talk about 2 concepts in this reading, or if you've got 2 readings or something like that. So they've got to be able to identify the main ideas and concepts and then write about those. Third question is a application question. What you'll notice is actually a lot of these apply to Bloom's taxonomy, right? Knowledge is a sort of identification. The comparison question, the application question is how does this apply like in a healthcare environment or professional environment or to your life? The third is a critique, so you're doing some analysis here, right? How would you critique the author's perspective and so on. The fifth is actually an emotional response. What makes you passionately respond to it negatively, affirmatively, or so on. And then the sixth question is if you roll the die and it comes up to 6, they get to choose which of those 5 questions they want to answer. So it works out pretty well. And so that's one part of it. And it takes about, I try and get them to do about 4 sentences, 4 to 8 sentences. I give them about 10 minutes to do it at the beginning of the class if we have a quiz. That trade-off of time for me is worth the quality of the conversations I get because the students have done the reading. And so now I'm like, Angus, now I can open those readings up to them, but I can open it up to them because they've actually done the reading in some helpful ways. The other deal with this is they can also bring in any notes. They can't use the actual text itself, okay? But any notes that they've typed up or handwritten, they can use as the basis of their answer. So the idea here is to get them to take good notes that answer and are aimed at these bigger ideas. And then they've got those notes which we can then use down the road for exams and stuff like that as well. So they have to really engage with the text. Is that one of my students, after failing her first quiz, said, I realize now that running my eyes over the words isn't reading. And so she actually realized they had to start really looking for these sort of bigger things. It also helps them sort of separate out the minutiae from the larger arguments that they face. So it works, I think, it works really well for readings where there's a sort of argument or a big idea as part of it. I found, for instance, it doesn't work as well like in a history class. If you're sort of doing a historical period, like I do a church history class, I don't use it for that because I don't find it, what's the big idea of the Dark Ages? There's not, that there is no such thing as the Dark Ages. But yeah, I mean, so it may work in different classes, but again, this was developed by a psychology professor. And so he's used it at least in some of his classes. And again, I think it could work well in a lot of other sort of scientific things where there's a bigger argument to deal with. Now, the second one is actually some variations on this. So again, I think we'll just take one and pass it around, and again, you can sort of read these at your leisure.
I had a question on what this variation is, but do you think it would work if, these are kind of broad, but if you had more specific, like 5 questions that you developed, so you'd have to develop different ones for every topic, like your history, that these would be the 5 that you'd ask, because with the engaged learning that Natalie and Dixie had, I use pre-lecture questions that they have to answer. They're very factual. Right. But I found I'm just rereading my PowerPoint slides. They looked at my PowerPoint slide, they copied their answer, verbatim off my PowerPoint slide, which is where I expect them to probably get it. Right. But if they didn't have the PowerPoint slide, it probably would be at least some different wording from time to time.
Yeah, I think there's some actually things you could do with Moodle where maybe if you wanted to have them take the quiz before you release the PowerPoint to them, because there's some things I've never done this, but there's some things in PowerPoint where they have to do an assignment to get access to additional material. So there's some things like that you might be able to do like that. I do this in class, so I don't know. I'm just trying to think sort of creatively. Oh, okay. All right, there we go. So a couple of variations that you'll see in the second article. They build this off of FranU's article, but one is instead of doing it random quizzing, they actually just say they do it like either every class or something like that. So it's not random. Or sometimes instead of having them do the quiz in class, there's one way where you can actually have them just turn in the answers to all 5 questions before class. So that'd be another way of doing that. That's almost like a reading journal. I use reading journals in some of my other classes as well. So there's a number of sort of variations, but you can see they've all got sort of satisfaction level of engagement. So there's some statistical analysis to all of this. As I continue with this, so a couple things I've learned. One is when I do the first quiz, I do what's called an exam wrapper. So the first time they take the quiz, I have them flip over their answer and then on the back write about how they would prepare differently for the future ones. Sometimes they do it just right. But a lot of times that first one, it's a metacognitive activity by which they sort of assess how did their preparation go. So I find that sort of helps, and I just check and make sure that they're sort of headed on the right track there. There's some things I could probably do to improve this that they sort of point out here. I should probably give some good exemplars of what a good answer looks like. on some of these things. And probably the other thing that is where I would sort of like to grow is really to actually put together some stuff on teaching students how to read and how to take notes effectively. So I've got an assignment that makes them do that, but I'm not sure I've actually really taught them how to take notes effectively or how to read effectively. So that's an area of growth, at least for me. So that's the Monte Carlo quiz. I use that in my intro course to great effect, for at least from my perspective, because I give them very difficult readings and they actually do them. But I've got two other things I want to talk about, but let me just see if there's anybody's got questions on Monte Carlo quizzes. All right. So two other things that I've sort of experimented with, I haven't done a lot recently, are social forms of reading that you can do online. So one is this website called Hypothesis, and what it does is it allows you to actually go through and annotate the web. So if you've got any sort of readings that are available on the web, you can actually assign a class the opportunity to sort of all read the page, and they can actually sort of mark it and just layer stuff on it. Let me see if I can show you real quick. Should show up. Let's see if it's not showing up. All right. All right, well, then we'll have to, you'll just have to imagine it, but anyway, what Hypothesis does is, actually what you would be allowed to do is like just highlight this, and it would actually show up to everybody in the class when you do that if you had a question about it. So if you've got online reading that you're having students do or something that's really available, you can actually have everybody basically read it together, and you can see the comments that they put in. And that way you get a sort of social form of learning. You can see where the sticky points are. People don't understand stuff, and so on. So for any sort of stuff that's web available, it's a really interesting sort of way of trying it. And then there's another sort of version of that. So this is all sort of public. You can actually go on, if you log in Hypothesis, you can actually see that people do stuff on CNN and so on. Another one that I have used is something called Classroom Salons. And this is actually out of Carnegie Mellon. And what this allows you to do is same thing. You can post activities like PDFs and so on, and again have everybody read. So for instance, this is what you have over here is a document, and then people can go through and edit it, and so you can see students write questions and so on. So I have an online course on Catholic social teaching, and basically like what you would be able to do is do something like so you can highlight it and you can write a note, I don't understand this, or this is something I think that's interesting. Or as a professor, you can put a question about a particular thing and have students answer it. And then you can actually sort of read all their comments, the conversations, sub-conversations, and so on. So I have a course on Catholic social teaching where all the documents are basically freely available online. So I just cut and paste those documents in there. And then the students can actually read them, and they can see what other students are asking, or they can ask a question about it, and other students can help, and so on. So it's a form of social reading that you can get. And then you can see, right, as a professor, you can see where their questions are, what they're doing, and so on. So it allows you to actually respond to where their sticky moments are. So those are two things that I've used a little bit in the past. Damon, you've got a question?
Yeah, for the Hypothesis website, you can do that with any web page?
As far as I know.
Oh. And then about your use of the Classroom Salon, what's your criteria? Like, what do you ask them to do?
So, I'll ask them to read it and note, so it depends on what you're doing, right? It's for an online course, but I'll have them note things questions, usually like questions that arise for them, things they don't understand, or things that they want to comment on. So I usually have 2 or 3 tags that I actually do. So sometimes I'll say, this is something I don't understand. And then what I ask is actually the other students to try and respond to that, not me, but the other students actually contribute to their learning. So if somebody says, I don't understand what he means by the common good, right? Somebody else can write, well, the common good is da-da-da, or they can even Google and do a link. So part of it is actually getting them to ask questions and respond and help each other as they don't understand stuff. So you can sort of do all sorts of things with it. You can also have them annotate videos. So you could take a speech that somebody gives and actually have them annotate the video to at a particular point. So there's all sorts of really interesting things you can sort of do with this. You have to play around with it a little bit to figure out what sort of purpose it's going to serve for you.
If they're helping each other, how do you avoid someone giving wrong information? Do you, how much?
Well,
do
that's
you
when you would
monitor?
step in and say, well, not quite, or, you
How
know.
often do you think have you?
Well, I just pay attention. I mean, you can go, what you can do as an instructor is you can sort of see all the comments, and so you just sort of skim through and see where they are and clarify. I mean, I would think that's interesting. I would think even with math, you could probably do problems and stuff like that and have students sort of work them out. And that would be an interesting sort of thing. And Carnegie Mellon has lots of different sort of samples, so you can see how they're using it at their institution.
Thank you.
So that's it for me. That's all I know.
Okay. Again, I don't remember what order we determined.
I think we had an order.
Okay. Flip coin. Natalie.
All right, so, I teach like all levels of biology, right? So I have different strategies for freshmen versus my seniors, right? Because when I first got here, I sort of thought, oh, they know a lot of this already, I'm gonna teach this, but lots of different levels in the classes I teach, right? So I'm gonna go really low tech, like Leanne, and start with daily quizzes. They really work, right? So like my freshmen, sophomores in like anatomy and physiology, y'all know, they are terrified, right? Terrified of that class. So they are super motivated to do whatever I ask, at least at first, right? So I don't say go and read 40 pages of chapter 1. I do give them notes that have been kind of processed by me, but at least they have looked at terminology, right? And sometimes I say, hey, from the notes, what happened next, if I'm doing like a process, okay? So I was gonna say freshmen, sophomores, just daily quizzes, reading the notes. And my research student, I met with her today, and she was in my AMP class 1 and 2 this past year. I asked her, did she think it really worked? She's like, oh yeah, we all read the notes. We all read the notes, and they would be before class, getting their highlighters out and asking me, what does this mean? So at least they're reading notes, right? That was enough for my purposes. So I'm gonna have to say, okay, this word, this word, this word. At least they looked at them, tried to process it, all right? And the quizzes, they cannot be super application-based or anything. They're all just vocabulary quizzes, all right? So give a definition, they pick the right word. And nothing designed to trick them. It should be fairly obvious what the answer is if, you know, they read the notes. All right. And, yeah,
How do you find they do on that?
usually 4 to 5. 4 to 5.